the big one. It was a black market ring that involved shiploads of military supplies, equipment, arms, and ammunition. A 2-star general and 11 other U.S. Army officers were implicated. Knowing the Army brass would protect its own, Mark took his factual evidence of the swindle directly to a friend at the Associated Press News Bureau in Saigon. The top blew off when the story broke in papers across the United States, and Mark was quickly relieved of duty with the CIC. A week later, 5 shadowy figures jumped Mark and dragged him into a warehouse where they beat him with boots and pipes, leaving him for dead. His gut determination to survive and extract vengeance pulled him through. After a long stay in an Army hospital, he finally found some peace in a modern mountain hideout in the Calico Mountains of Southern California, where no man could track him down. The Army rednecks knew he was alive and still wanted to repay him for his betrayal. That had been before his work as the penetrator really began, and it seemed like 1,000 years ago. In Washington, D.C., he had challenged the entrenched Société Internationale d'Élite and put an end to a plot to assassinate the President of the United States. Casualties had mounted as Mark shot up the secret organization, but soon he was dodging the Metropolitan Police as well as the club's hired killers. The contest came to a bloody conclusion in Williamsburg, Virginia, with the help of a British Army weapon from 1716, a Brown Bess muzzleloader musket. Before that, there had been a tangle in Las Vegas with the Fraulein, a woman so evil she preyed on innocent young girls who were dedicated to dancing. Her Star-Maker agency turned them into nude dancers in casinos and high-priced prostitutes for the rooms upstairs. The whole operation, and the Pink Pussy Casino, fell in a battle of bullets and blood, but Mark didn't have to pull the final trigger on the Fraulein. Between each of these furious dramas of death, Mark had returned to the stronghold in the California mountains, determined to think through some directions for his life, some higher purpose that would be productive and worthwhile. But each time he had seen the sweet face of Donna Morgan and remembered her agony as she burned to death, trapped in the smashed car high in the mountains near Big Bear. The Los Angeles Mafia family had been behind her death, and they had expected Mark to die in the crash, too. He nearly did, but he had been thrown out of the car as it rolled down the steep embankment. By the time he had regained consciousness, the car was burning fiercely, and the Mafia hitmen had left. That had been the deciding tragedy in a long list of brushes with the underworld, with crooks and goon squads, and it tilted him into a fight against them all, hoping he could even the score for Donna Morgan, for himself, and for every unfortunate victim of organized criminal activity. He had seen too many friends die in Vietnam to believe he could fight forever, but he was in the battle for as long as he lasted. Hardin had stormed into Los Angeles and within a month had torn and smashed apart one of the premier mafia families in the nation, the Scarelli family. Don Pietro Scarelli felt the penetrator's vengeance as he shot up half the criminal soldiers in town and broke up a multi-million-dollar heroin ring. Now the battle was about to start again. There were no more doubts. He was fully, firmly, unalterably committed to fighting every aspect of crime he could find in any way he could. There would be no final victory for him in this war. He knew that. He might come out ahead in the small skirmishes, as he had done so far, but sooner or later the odds would catch up with him. How many Mafia bullets had missed him already? How many explosions, careening cars, and knife thrusts had been just far enough away to spare him? He knew it took only one. During the game, he would take out as many of them as he could. Trite? Of course. After all the killing, life seemed a continuous playing out of an imbecilic and distorted scenario. But for as long as he could suck in enough breath, he would take his part in the drama. David Red Eagle in the stronghold near Barstow would frown and shake his head at this kind of thinking. He would call Mark a cynic. Red Eagle, a full-blooded Cheyenne Indian, had nursed Mark back to health after the murderous auto crash that killed Donna. It was Red Eagle who had sparked in Mark pride in his heritage, an understanding of his ancestors. The old Cheyenne had educated Mark in the skills the traditional warrior of his people must possess. He also learned some of the rituals and the protections of Shotuka. These mind and body disciplines of the ancient Cheyennes had captivated him. He found they could heighten his senses of sight and hearing. Perhaps they could help him during his battles, as they had helped the Cheyenne Indian dog soldiers 100 years ago. Mark knew that even Professor Haskins would lift one thin white brow at Mark's constant mental examination of his position. The professor was a practical man, a retired university science professor. He had taken Mark in on a friend's recommendation, and soon Mark had been invited to stay and join the stronghold. Years before, the professor had built his retreat deep in the barren, almost inaccessible desert mountains. Now the three men formed a troika, a three-way pact, and created a smoothly working team to do battle with crime wherever it was found. The professor served as intelligence man, researcher, and supplier of outside contacts, as well as developer of special weapons, such as Ava, the small tranquilizer gun. David Red Eagle tutored Mark in the skills of the unarmed Indian fighter, schooled him in Shotuka, and watched his diet. Mark was the outside man, the action, the assault force. Very often, Mark thought back to those 3 months of joy and tenderness he had experienced when he was with Donna Morgan. She was the professor's niece and worked as a research assistant in the anthropology department at the University of Southern California. He could still see her gentle smile, which often turned into a soft laugh. He remembered the pixie-like arching of her brows, her abrupt way of breaking into a run, and the sudden, silly, funny things she did to see him first smile and then laugh. At last he closed his eyes tightly and his hands doubled into fists as he began thinking about a new assignment, another mission. There had to be some other way to strike back at the criminal structure, and at this atmosphere of permissiveness that spawned so much crime, and the mafia with it. Now, Mark turned, slid out of his khaki shorts, and stepped into the Indian sweat lodge which David Red Eagle had constructed far down one of the old mine tunnels where it met a flooded shaft. Smoke streamed out the lodge top and up an air shaft toward the top of the mountain. Inside the lodge, a ruddy glow was cast by the round bed of red-hot coals at the center of the cedar and deerskin structure. Suspended over the coals stood a platform of iron strips, covered with a layer of small round stones. Mark moved close to the fire, then threw water on the hot stones and sucked in the instant steam. He thought of all he had concentrated on during the past 2 weeks of work and study. He had memorized critical, evaluative briefings by the professor on national and world affairs. He had speed-read selected material the professor had marked for him, and he had continued his physical training until he could run 2 miles through the desert heat in 12 minutes. For hours he had stalked Red Eagle, and only after many tries had he approached through a stone and leaf-strewn gully undetected. The old Indian's frown had changed to a quiet smile. Now, as a gush of steam billowed up from the rocks, he knew he was ready for a new assignment. He sat, cross-legged, and threw more water on the stones. The professor had said something about New York, and had looked worried at lunch. Mark tried to forget it and relax. Soon enough he would be moving, anxious, eager to get back into action. He would give the enemy no warning. His strike would be hard, fast.